Hey, it's Tim here, and this is the third video in my series talking about Tableau file types. Today we're talking about the Tableau data extract. Now, this is actually an interesting file type because it's had a little bit of a change over the last couple of years. We're going to cover that in a little bit, but otherwise, you can really improve the quality of your workflow working in Tableau if you fully understand what extracts are, how to create them, some of the benefits of having an extract, and also some nuances to watch out when creating an extract. Add to that the recent changes to the Tableau data model, and there's also a few new things that you might not be aware of with Tableau extracts that I'm also going to cover in this video. Okay, let's get stuck in. Okay, so in front of me right now, I have 4 different file types. So I've already done a video on the TDS and the TDSX. These are these 2 files that I'm clicking right now. We did a video on Tableau bookmarks as well, but the Tableau data extracts, or otherwise called a TDE in the past or hyper in the present world, is over here on the right-hand side. It's actually this icon here with a little sort of database icon with an arrow going from one to the other. Now, it's a really important file type to be aware of because if you're working with data sets such as databases or really cumbersome Excel files, when you create an extract, it can actually improve the performance of what you're doing in Tableau. So what exactly does an extract do? What are the benefits and what are they? Well, as ever, as I pretty much do in every single video, I don't just sort of talk to you from experience, I refer to the documentation. Tableau documentation is really, really good in this field. So the Tableau data extracts has several benefits. Number one, if you're working with large files, it can optimize those large files and make it much faster and easier to work with that data. Number two, it lets you take a snapshot of the data set that you're working with so that you can essentially work on a smaller set of the data. Or let's say you're connecting to a database that is maybe far away geographically, or is very slow, or maybe is changing because it's still in development. You can take a snapshot at a point in time, save that locally on your laptop. And so that allows you to carry on with your build process, develop your workbook. But then when you're ready, you can then switch back to a live connection to the database and improve the quality of what you're doing without having to wait for things to get into sort of a stable state. The other benefit is that occasionally there are some computations that are much faster done inside of an extract than natively inside of a database. This is for a very nuanced aspect. We won't go into too much of that into this video, but I will highlight to you where this is highlighted by Tableau and how to find out those instances and use cases. The very last benefit is, of course, an extract allows you to take a snapshot, which you can then, of course, share with someone. So if you maybe want to take a snapshot of data to give to, let's say, a consultant who is coming on site for just one day, you can give them an extract, they can build off that extract, and then when you're ready, you can connect it back to your database many days or many months after they've gone and delivered the work. So those are some of the high level benefits. Those benefits are sometimes not really worth considering when you create a new workbook or start out with a new file, because fundamentally, my viewpoint is if you want the best performance, typically always work with an extract unless you're connecting to a published data source or you're working with a database that is designed to deliver those speeds. One thing you can then do is get those extracts to update and refresh. So let's get stuck into Tableau. I've talked way too much. Let's dive into the product and find out how it all works. So I'm going to switch over to Tableau here. I've got a very simple Tableau instance open here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to the Superstore file. Now, this is a very standard file in Tableau. You can also connect to a database if you're following along. That's perfectly fine too. This will work exactly the same way. I'm going to go and select this sample Superstore, the second saved data source here, and I'm just going to click on that on the bottom left here, and it opens up a new Tableau instance. Now, this is great because what this does is it connects us to the Excel file that's located in our documents folder, which has all the data sources that Tableau uses. So if I just go here to properties, you'll see that it's actually an Excel file that I'm connected to. And I know that this is a live connection because if I just focus in on this cylinder here at the top, because it's just the cylinder and nothing else, I know that this is a live connection. Let's go ahead and create an extract. So to do that, we just right click on the data source. And as we go down, you'll see this option here to extract the data. Go ahead and click on that. And then you get this option. Now, I'm going to come back to this page in a second. What I want to do is just show you the process of creating an extract. Then I'll explain each of these features here on this page in more detail. So let's carry on through, leave everything as it is, all the defaults. Let's just create an extract. Now, the second thing it's going to ask you is where do you want to save that extract? So the extract this time, I'd like to save it in my Tableau file types folder, and I'll call this version 2 so that it doesn't overwrite the previous one. And I'll go ahead and click save. And normally, depending on the size of the file, you might not even see a window saying that the extract is being created. So really small files, it will just happen instantaneously. The way you know that it's now an extract is twofold. Number one, you'll see this icon here on the top left has changed. Also, if you right click on this data source, you now get the options to change whether this is using an extract or not. So you can see here that before these options were grayed out, and now I can actually use them. And there's a big tick next to the use extract option. And there's also some options now available for me because I'm working with an extract. One of those being a refresh, and also the ability to understand the history and the properties of the extracts. Again, I won't dive into too much of that into this video. I'm just trying to show you how it works. So that's basically it. That's an extract in a nutshell. Let's go ahead and find the extract and see what happens when you open it. So let's just go back here to my file browser, and you'll see here that I have the two files that I have previously. I have the original one that we had in the folder, then the one that I just created called V2. And you'll notice here that it has an extension called .hyper. I'll come back to this very, very shortly. But now that we have the extract here, if I just double click the one that I created, what should happen is it will open up a new copy of Tableau, and it will already have the data source already connected. Now, interestingly here, our extract, although it's been created, it's just a data source. So it essentially captured all the information about the data. And so what I still need to do here is bring it in, and there we go. We pretty much have a data source ready to go. Now, if I just close this and let me just open the previous one, you'll see some slightly different behavior. So let's just open up this first one that I created, and let's just double click that. This is actually an EU Superstore file rather than the American one. And when I double click this one, again, Tableau opens up, but you'll notice that it has a data model here that says extract. So the key thing to remember here is that because of the additions to the data model, extracts have become a little bit more complicated, but also it's still as simple as it used to be. I know it's a slightly sort of weird way of talking about it, but if I open up this sort of logical layer here and go into the physical layer, you'll see that it's still an extract and it's all the same information. It's nothing really sort of that different. Now, if I close this as well and I go back and I just drag one of these hyperfiles into the canvas, you will notice a different behavior, which is it will add this connection to the existing workbook. So it will open up the connection window. If I go back to sheet 1, you'll see that I'm now connected to my extract. It's got the single cylinder, okay? And this is always a really confusing aspect of Tableau. If you connect to an extract, well, Tableau thinks you're connecting to a data source. So of course, it shows it as a live connection to the extract. So if I right click on here and I go to properties, you'll see this is actually a hyperfile, but it treats it like a live connection. So sometimes that can be confusing. You're working with an extract, but you've only got the single cylinder icon. That's just something sort of to get your head around and to be aware of. You can then, of course, take an extract of the extract. It just gets really complicated very quickly. So I think that could be improved. But just bear in mind, if you want to work with an extract, you just drag it in and it will come into the existing workbook that you've got open. Now, let me just close this connection and go back to the file types. Now you'll see here that it says sample EU superstore.hyper or sample superstore v2.hyper. Now, depending on the version of Tableau that you're using, this actually used to be called something slightly different. It used to be called a Tableau data extract, a .tde file. And in Tableau 10.5, Tableau introduced the new file format for Hyper. And the key thing here is if you're using a version that is older or is 2020.3, newer or is 2020.3, then essentially what will happen is that every time you open a .tde extract or Tableau data extract with a .tde format, it will be automatically upgraded to a Hyper file. So let me just show you the documentation on this particular capability. You'll see here that if I just go back specifically in 2020.3, extracts will get upgraded to the new format. They're essentially trying to deprecate the .tde format. So appreciate a lot of people watching these videos are sometimes using older versions of Tableau, and so that's just something to be aware of. Now that said, pretty much most of the features of an extract still exist between a TDE and a .hyper. They're essentially the same thing. I've actually got a podcast with a friend, Ravi Mistry, and also Zen Master. I'll put a link in the description or it will pop up on screen at the moment. But essentially, you get all the same functionality. You don't need to think too much about the differences between them unless you're using something very specific. For example, if you use a hyperfile, you'll get better performance. You'll see much more improved capabilities. And so it's actually a desirable format to be using. Rarely with TDEs do you actually want to be using them if you've got the latest and best of Tableau. Okay, So let's just carry on with the video, and I'll just sort of keep talking as if hypers and TDEs are the same thing. If I mention hyper, just loosely be aware that it will generally work with the TDE file as well. If we get into nuances, this video will get too long. So that's pretty much the sort of the bare bones of an extract. Now, what I didn't do is explain some of the options around extract. So if I just go back to our file, you'll see that I've got the extract here on my desktop. If I go back and I remove the extract, and there's two ways to do this. You can just untick this option here that says use extract. And when you do that, the cylinder switches to a single cylinder, right? So you get that double icon cylinder removed and you go back to a single. This essentially means that instead of pointing to my .hyper file in my folder here, it's actually pointing back to the Excel file, okay? And then if I go back to this view and I right click and I say use the extract, it switches back to the hyper file. So you can essentially switch between a live connection and the snapshot, as it were, or the snapshot and the database, whatever it is, you can switch between those just to make sure everything is working really, really well. This is great if you're building something and it's maybe development or prod, and you can just switch to the live database to make sure that the data is coming through properly. Maybe it doesn't work, fine, just switch it back to an extract and you're all good, okay? So that's pretty much it. So what I actually want to do now is remove the extract. I want to get rid of the extract altogether. So actually, if I go here to the extract option and I go remove, what Tableau will do is it will just remove the extract, okay? And you can also ask it to delete the extract. So this will go ahead and delete the file. So let's go ahead and do that. Click OK. So now it's removed the extract, it's deleted it. If I go back to the file folder, you'll see here that the V2 file has disappeared. So it's sort of cleaning up after itself when it's removed the extract, which is a great sort of capability. Now, the reason I did that is because now I want to create an extract and go through some of those details in more detail. So let's go in here and let's go to extract data. And let's look at the first key thing that you're faced with, which is the logical tables at the top and physical tables. Now, if you're not familiar with these terms, highly advise you check out my video on the data model. I've done really sort of concise summary of what the data model is, and in that video I talk about logical and physical layers. There's a terminology that Tableau uses to help explain how the data model works. And fundamentally, the data model brings a few complexities to extracts, because up until the data model 2020.2, there used to be a capability to do multi-file extracts, okay? And multi-file extracts, it's actually probably better just to show you what I mean, okay? So let's make this simpler. So at the moment, you can see the logical tables option is ticked. There is no physical tables options capable to me, okay? So there's nothing I can do to tick this. So again, watch my data model video to understand more on that. So let's go in here and edit the data source. And what you'll see is that I have orders, people, and return. So this is just a standard data model, okay? Nothing too complex. And the reason this is behaving this way is because I haven't got any sort of physical tables beyond these logical tables that need to be worked in. So Tableau looks at the data source and realizes, hey, the only thing you need here are logical tables, orders, peoples, and returns. So if I go into orders and I open that up, and then what I do in here is I create a join on returns. It's going to complain a little bit. So let's just say order ID, and this should be returns. Yeah, let's just create it like that and just do a left join. I think the returns data set is a little bit weird, but we'll just close this and we'll leave it like that. So here we are. We've got the basic information here about the returns, and now I go back, close that, and then go back to my sheet. That change has taken place. It's still a live connection. But now if I right click, go to extract data, you'll see that I now get the option for a physical table, okay? So that's a key thing to be aware of, okay? The physical table option will only appear when you actually have physical tables and joins inside of the logical layer, as it were, okay? So it's a slight sort of complexity to be aware of. Again, if you check out the documentation, it goes into examples and instances where this is going to specifically happen. A good use case is, for example, row level security, when you do probably actually want physical tables so that the join is done in real time rather than being pre-computed and blowing up your data set into this sort of really tall sort of duplicated data set. Okay, so that's probably an example where you want to be able to do that. If what I just said sounds like alien, whatever, just don't worry about it. Honestly, there's lots of blog posts you can Google, and when you come across the feature, you worry about it then. But just remember, to enable these physical table option, you need to have a physical table inside of your data model, okay? But I'll stick to logical tables and I'll go to the next option, which is filters. So filters allow you to do exactly that. They allow you to filter your data set before you take the extract, okay? So extracts are an important part of the flow, if you think about the order of operations, for example, where if you exclude a bit of information from your extract, then it's not going to be available from that point onwards if you're working with that extract. So if I go in here and I add a city extract and I just say that I'm only looking at Aberdeen and I click at OK, I'm working with the European data set, you'll see here that it says city keeps Aberdeen. So when I create my extract, it will remove this from my snapshot. So my snapshot will shrink in size and I'll only be working with data from the city of Aberdeen. Okay. You can add multiple conditions as well. So maybe I only want to look at Aberdeen and I only want to look at furniture sales in Aberdeen. So you can see that I'm now building sort of a nice sort of set of conditions. And this is great, especially if you're building like an ad hoc report. You just need to filter a large database down to maybe a small customer or particular area. And so you take an extract, you filter it down, and then you just build with that locally on your machine. Okay, so that's basically what the filter option does. The next thing is aggregation. Okay, so let's just take this extract now, and then we'll take a look at it and see what happens when we change the aggregation option. So let's just take an extract. Again, it's going to ask us where to save that. We'll just call this Aberdeen furniture. I really hope we have furniture being sold in Aberdeen. Otherwise, this is going to return next to no data in my extract. So there we go. It's done the extract, and surprise, surprise, there's no furniture being sold in Aberdeen. What I'll do is I'll fix that by removing the extract. We'll do this again for the benefit of the demo. And we'll go back in, we'll extract the data, and this time we'll just add the city of Aberdeen as an example. Okay, so we know Aberdeen exists. There's definitely cells. We'll do extracts again and call Aberdeen only. Hit save. And now if I go look at the summary of the data, I have one row of data. Okay, so this is a very sort of small subset of data, but this is the only data available in the whole entire workbook. It's just a single row. If I then remove that again, let's delete that again, and let's just change this, extract data. I'm just repeating this for the benefit of the video. And let's say this time for the category, I'm only going to analyze technology cells. Okay, let's click OK, click extract, and then call this technology. Okay, now that's gone ahead and done that. And if I go and do the preview, you'll get a lot more rows, 1,847. But notice that every single one here, category, is just technology. If you don't believe me, let's drag the category item from the product hierarchy, and the only thing we'll get back is technology. Now, watch what happens when I switch back to the live connection by unticking this use extract. You see the other categories come in because in my main data source, of course, I haven't filtered this. I haven't filtered this from the data source. You do that with a data source filter, but we haven't done that here. So if I switch back to my extract, it's just looking at a subset of data. So now you can see how extracts are useful, especially when you're creating snapshots. Okay, we've only got a couple more things to cover off. The next thing I want to show you is the aggregation option. So let's just right click on this, and if I make sure I'm actually in here and then remove the extract. Again, we're going to delete the extracts while we do this. Right click and let's go to extract, and you'll see that we have the option that we've had all along. I'm going to go ahead and add the same category and technology section just so we can sort of build on our previous understanding. But now you'll see this option to aggregate data to visible dimensions. What does this actually mean? Essentially what Tableau will do is it will analyze your data set and figure out which dimensions are being used and which ones aren't. Then having done that, it will essentially try and group the data up. So instead of maybe saying having 1 million rows at the day level or at the time level, you know, in a level of detail that you're not analyzing, it will look at the data, see what you are analyzing, and try and reduce the number of rows by adding up the rows where possible. So let's say you're counting the number of sales or the amount of profit. It will aggregate that up so that you just get maybe one line where there were previously 2 lines, essentially. So it makes your data set a little bit more compact. The other option is the ability to choose which rows you bring in. So there is an option here at the top called an incremental refresh. I'll come to this in a second. But you can also choose which subset of data to bring in. So maybe you just want the top orders by a specific sort of condition. So if I say top, you can obviously change this. And notice these are actually based on my logical data model. Okay, so these options here are reflecting my logical layers in my data set, not specifically columns in my data set. Okay, and I can just say bring in the top 100 rows in the orders tables. Okay, or I can sample it instead. So instead I can say, okay, look at the orders table and bring in the random sample of 100 rows, or I can bring in a certain percentage of data depending on how that works. Okay, so that's a really cool feature. The last thing is an incremental refresh. So if I click on incremental refresh, I actually get some new options. If I just bring this up so that it's all in the screen here, the options I get are essentially going to ask me which table I'd like to refresh. Okay, so in this case, previously in the past, you never really had to worry about this because you had a physical layer. So everything in the physical layer just gets updated wholesale. Essentially, it's checking everything in that single layer to see what's fresh. In a logical layer, you actually have to be a little bit more specific because the logical layer is driving the rest of the behavior in the data source and in the workbook. So if I select orders here, I then have to tell it how to identify new rows. So in the typical database, this might be a creation date or modified date, or it might be something like a transaction date. Essentially, you always want to make sure there's something unique every time a transaction is changed or updated, and then Tableau will bring it in. And so that's how you can choose here. You'll see that it only lets you choose specific things, and typically these tend to be the measures, okay? And dates, again, tend to work a lot better here. So if you choose order date, it's basically going to look for new orders beyond a certain date. We're making the assumption that the order information can't be changed once the order is made, okay? If there's a return, for example, that is actually created in a separate database, right? So we get a fresh set of data even if an order is returned. You can't edit something or transaction once a transaction has taken place. So there we have it. If I click incremental refresh by order date and then choose extract, what will happen is next time I go to refresh this data, it will actually only update to see new rows. So let's just go ahead and create this. So let's say technology, incremental, and click save. So now we have that. If I right click on this and I go to extract, you'll see here that I have the option now to do an incremental refresh, which will only look for new rows using the orders table based on order date. Or I can do a full refresh, which is essentially the ability to just expunge the whole lot and start again. These are the same options you get on Tableau Server when you publish this to Tableau Server via Workbook or Tableau Online. And essentially those options sort of persist all the way through. You'll also see some of this terminology in Tableau Prep with the ability to update data sources incrementally as well. Okay, so that's pretty much all the options in the extract capabilities. Obviously, there's a couple more things we haven't covered here. For example, the history gives you some sort of context as to how many rows were updated. So if you're constantly updating the extract and you start to build out a history, you can actually see when the last action was taken and what happened. So if I just close this, right click, extract, refresh incremental, it's going to do that in the background. It will happen so quickly it doesn't even pop up a dialog window. But now if I go back to the properties, I have just a history, sorry, you'll see that the first thing I did was a full refresh, and more recently I've done an incremental refresh here. So it's actually working really nicely. So you can actually trace what is new and what's been added in. So you can see here, this time around, I added 446 rows. Reason being is the previous refresh was a full refresh when we had changed sort of the subset of what was required. So it's brought in an additional 446 based on the way I wrote the condition, okay? So that's pretty much extracts in a nutshell. There's plenty more we can cover here, of course. I don't want to make this video too long. It's already long enough. The best thing to do is to check out the Tableau documentation. There are also a whole series of great blog posts out there in the Tableau community. If you just go to Google, type in Tableau extracts, what are they? You'll find a whole bunch of great resources. But this video is primarily just a basic introduction to show you sort of where to go. These 2 pages by Tableau, I'm going to put them in the description, are really fundamental sort of understanding. If you're working with Tableau every single day and you haven't had the opportunity to spend some time really understanding the nooks and crannies of extracts, then this is a really good place to go. I wanted to call out some specific things to be aware of. So there are sometimes quirks that you come across, and actually it's to do with things like how data is interpreted in the extract. So things like dates and formats, things like when the extract is taken and where the database is when that extract is taken, can do things like change dates and so on and so forth. The other thing is computations. Some computations are better and more optimized in an extract environment compared to a database. And again, you really need to use Tableau for some time to really start to get to the nuances of how that works, okay? The other thing is, if you're working with this a lot, you'll sometimes actually come up against edge cases where it's actually better to do things that are slightly unconventional. So again, this post here by Tableau goes into the details of that. The other thing is extract upgrade. So if you're using a TDE and you are transitioning to a newer version of Tableau, it's worth understanding what happens to a TDE when you start to use it in a new version of Tableau, because it is not possible to downgrade a workbook from Hyper to a TDE format. So once you have that extract then that's been upgraded, you can't go back. So what does that actually mean? Well, if you want to share data, maybe it's a TDE file, you update it, it turns into a Hyper file. Now you can't share that data source with someone who was using a version of Tableau that only relied on TDE. So that's just something to be aware of, okay? Just make sure you don't break your workflow, because there is no way of sort of going back. So I'll put these blogs or these articles and documentation in the description below. Definitely check them out. And this is probably the third video actually now in the series about file types. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll talk about the most obvious one, which is the Tableau workbook. What is a workbook? What's a package workbook? And that will sort of conclude the series on different file types. Okay, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, you know what to do. If not, let us know in the comments below what you'd like to see instead. All right, take it easy.